So in this video, we're going to be talking about the new Canon 1DX Mark III. Now, I'm not going to be doing a full review on this camera, but instead I'm just going to tell you 10 things that I love about this camera and 2 things that I hate about this camera. Let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing that I like about this camera is the autofocus capability. Now, as you all know, I really did not like autofocus for video before this camera. But after using the 1DX Mark III and its autofocus capability, I was absolutely blown away. For stuff like this, I can just turn on face tracking and then press record and sit down, and I am not worried about anything because it's so good at autofocus face tracking. It was absolutely unbelievable. Now, the second thing that I like about this camera is, again, I didn't really care about before, but it's just changed my perspective, and that's IBIS, or the electronic image stabilization on this camera. I was able to run around with my daughter at the park, handheld, sometimes one-handed, with autofocus on and stabilization on, and oh my goodness, I have really shaky hands, and the footage that I got out of that was it just blew my mind. So the next thing that I like about the 1DX Mark III is the battery life. I mean, the battery is just ginormous. I don't even think I ran out of batteries when I used it for a week testing the cameras between the A7 III and the Pocket 4K. So the battery life is fantastic. Granted, I didn't really use image stabilization that much. I just used it for that couple of tests, but when it was on a tripod, I had it off. So yeah, I got really good batteries coming out of the 1DX Mark III, even when recording RAW 5.5K. So the next thing I liked about the camera are the recording options. There's 5.5K RAW, all intra MP4s, IPB, different frame rates, different resolutions. Absolutely blown away with all the options this camera has. Additionally, you can get an external recorder and record 10-bit out of the HDMI out of the camera, so that's another thing that you can do with this camera. Which brings us to the next topic of frame rates. I already mentioned it, multiple frame rates. The 5.5K RAW shoots 60 frames per second. Really impressive stuff. You can shoot in MP4 as well, non-RAW, 60 frames per second. You can shoot HD 120 frames per second. So as far as frame rate goes, this camera does not lack any slow motion whatsoever. All right, the next thing I like about this camera is the low light capability. So coming into getting this camera, I kind of had an idea that this camera was going to be really good in low light, because reading the spec sheets when this was first announced, I kind of knew that it was going to be good, but I was really impressed with how well the camera shot in low light. For what it can do as a hybrid camera, it did really good in low light situations. All right, the next thing we're going to talk about is the dynamic range. I mean, I have a 6D Mark II right now, so you can consider that kind of old school, even though it's not that old. But we all know that Canon was using kind of like the same sensor for a while, and the dynamic range on my 6D Mark II is not great. But so coming into the 1DX Mark III, I can definitely see the improvement of the dynamic range, especially in the highlight situations. You can pull some stuff back in post-production if you really want. So as far as dynamic range goes, it's not DSLR anymore. It's pretty darn good for what it is. All right, the next thing I like about this camera is the back of the screen. Even though it's not flippable, tiltable, whatever, selfie mode stuff, it's a really good screen. It's bright. The touchscreen works perfectly. It's very clear, and I absolutely love the screen on this camera. So that's the next thing that I liked. All right, and the last thing that I like about this camera was the build quality. I mean, I've heard a lot of good things about 1DX cameras. Granted, you know, this was my first 1DX camera, and it's just built like a freaking Batman tumbler. It's so nicely made, well-built camera. Definitely for professionals. I mean, the 1DX series, you probably see people, you know, in NFL, they getting tackled down on the ground and they can just get back up and, you know, and start shooting again. That's the kind of quality the 1DX Mark III has. Feels so amazing. It's a great camera. It doesn't feel plasticky whatsoever. It's freaking solid. All right, so now that I talked about all the good things about the camera, I'm gonna talk about the things I didn't like, which are just two things. The first one is the workflow at the moment. There is only one software that supports this thing natively with the Canon plugin, and that's Avid Composer. If you have Avid Composer, you can download the plugin in the Canon website and you can use the raw .crm file natively with the Avid Composer. Right now, as of end of February, DaVinci Resolve and Adobe Premiere does not support the .crm file or the raw file that comes out of the camera. So the workflow right now is very tedious. If you haven't seen my video on it, go ahead and check it out. I showed you how you have to do it in Windows if you don't have Avid. So the last thing that I don't like about this camera, and it's not necessarily a bad thing if you have cash, and that's the price point. At $6,400, that's a lot of money. But at the same time, the 1DX series, that's pretty normal as far as the 1DX series. Those are the expensive series out of the Canon series as far as DSLR goes. So the price point of $6,400 is really just me complaining because I don't have enough money to get it. But the good thing about it is 2 to 3 years from now, maybe even sooner, the price will drop on this thing. And I can guarantee you, if there's nothing else good out there, I will probably get this camera down the road whenever it's more feasible in my wallet, because it's absolutely, it would be an absolute steal if this thing will go down to like 3K or 4K used somewhere in the future. I know every time I make a video about hybrid cameras, I always say it's the best. I said it for the Sigma FP, I said it for the Panasonic S1H, but unfortunately, I'm gonna have to say it again. The Canon 1DX Mark III is probably, right now, end of February, the best hybrid stills and video camera out there that you can purchase. You can shoot 5.5K RAW in camera, 60 frames per second. That is definitely unheard of right now in a DSLR body. All right, so if you guys like this video, please do like and subscribe. This is my last year in getting my YouTube started. I've been running this YouTube channel for a while, and unfortunately, I only have like 8,000 subscribers, so this is my last push this year. So if you absolutely want me to keep making more videos about cameras and comparisons, please do like and subscribe, and I will see you guys later.